Since the beginning of Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine, the West has been escalating its offensive in terms of sanctions against Moscow. Western leaders vowed to hit Russia hard. It was oil that was the West's #1 target. Russia is the world's largest exporter of oil to global markets and the second largest crude oil exporter behind Saudi Arabia. Since the war began, while Russia has been diverting its crude exports to Asia, especially to China and India, and that is gathering pace now, the West has strengthened its resolve to not be dependent on Russian oil. But has it really acted on its claims? A Sunday Times report says a slick use of loopholes is keeping Russian oil flowing into Britain. We'll explain how. In May this year, while Putin bombarded Ukrainian soldiers trapped in Azovstal, an oil tanker pulled out of the Russian port of Tuapse carrying nearly 200,000 barrels of oil. After 5 days at sea, the ship stopped alongside a bigger tanker in the waters off Kalmata in Greece. The two vessels were connected by large rubber pipes, and after the ship-to-ship transfer, the Greek-owned ship sailed to the UK. It docked at Immingham in Lincolnshire, where 250,000 barrels of oil were offloaded. Official records, however, declared that the UK received no oil from Russia in June or July. The shipment was classified and reported correctly under British reporting protocols. The UK says there was no breach of maritime rules. The cargo was one of at least 39 of Russian oil cargoes worth more than £200 million to have arrived in British ports since the invasion of Ukraine, but to have been classified as imports from elsewhere. Almost £80 million of this was in June and July alone. According to the UK's trade statistics, in total £778 million worth of Russian oil has arrived at 10 UK ports since March this year. Official records show Russian oil worth £23 million has arrived in Immingham since March and has been recorded as imports from Germany, the Netherlands and Belgium. The East London port of Thamesport has received £130 million of oil from Russia since March. These were classified as imports from Poland, Belgium and the Netherlands. In March this year, the then UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced a plan to phase out imports of Russian oil, adding that the UK was joining its allies in halting the import of Russian oil. The import of Russian oil to the UK is legal till the 5th of December. That's when all imports will be barred. Until then, there's only a reputational risk to countries and companies that are seen as importing Russian oil. However, maritime experts say the way the UK registers imports and the increased use of ship-to-ship transfers will make it difficult for the UK to sanction Russian oil. Let me explain quickly how this happens. When they pull into port, ships have to provide the country of origin of their cargo. In the case of oil where it is refined in the UK, figures on oil imports are compiled by the Office for National Statistics and HM Revenue and Customs, or the HMRC. The HMRC registers the value of a shipment based on the country from which it was dispatched and the country of origin. This information is collated by the ONS. However, it's the country of dispatch that is used to measure the nationality of an import, not the country where it was produced. This means a cargo of Chinese-made goods could be registered as being from Germany if it were imported to the UK by a German firm. The ONS reported that the UK imported no oil from Russia in June. The same statistic was repeated by Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng on the 24th of August in a parliamentary debate. The HMRC data contradicted this. It shows that British ports accepted more than £78 million of Russian oil in June. These were reported as imports from the Netherlands, Estonia, Poland and Belgium. A further £1.5 million of Russian oil arrived at British ports in the month of July. This was logged as imports from France, the Netherlands, Germany and Latvia. Analysts say ship-to-ship transfers, which are used to help vessels that are too big to dock in ports to offload their cargo, are becoming more common since the war in Ukraine began. For now, the West is clearly torn between trying to restrict Moscow's revenues and concerns that losing Russian oil could cause a further price surge when most European countries are already grappling with an energy-driven inflation. For more on this story, we're now joined by Berzin Wagmar, who's a research fellow at the South Asia Institute. Thanks very much, Mr. Wagmar, for speaking to WION. Now, as we mentioned in our report, at least 39 Russian oil cargoes worth more than £200 million have arrived in various British ports since the invasion of Ukraine, but these have all been classified as imports from somewhere else. Almost £80 million was just in the months of June and July. Clearly, the West, especially the UK, is failing to walk the talk on imposing costs on Russia, sanctioning and isolating it.
The problem lies with the documentation protocol. That is the nub of it. As you rightly pointed out, till the 5th of December, we have not violated anything as per international law and has been agreed among the allies. Until the 5th of December, not just Britain, but also EU members, and of course we've left the EU, but EU members can import Russian oil by sea. Repeat, by sea. Therein lies the nub. After 5th December, we would be in violation of what has been agreed. Point number one. Point number two, it is a British newspaper that has reported this, which also must be noted as a paper of repute, The Times no less, about Britain importing. But when you say Britain importing, can we insert some qualifiers here, please? We are talking about commodity traders and shipping companies that must be implicated for this, not His Majesty's government per se. Which leads me on to what you rightly mentioned about the Office for National Statistics and His Majesty's Revenue and Customs. Now, they are responsible for marshalling data, enumerating it and supplying it to Parliament and to the public at large. What you have rightly again pointed out is the dispatchal point, which is at just one remove, which is noted on documentation and lading sheets here. The problem involves that and that alone, which will have to be revised. In light of which, may I also add to your report and point this out, which has not been mentioned, that on 3rd November, Parliament passed legislation which introduced that all countries and firms from using UK services will be precluded who transport Russian oil. This was passed on the 3rd of November and will come into effect, no doubt, with the 5th December deadline in question. Also, Prime Minister Sunak, as you know, just visited President Zelensky on Saturday and committed himself once again to the Kiev's rightful, justified war for freedom and to liberate itself. By promising a package of £50 million for anti-aircraft guns, batteries, radar, and the like. And can we just back up a bit in a question of globalization? May I point this out? We know Iranian technicians are in occupied Crimea, and Iranian Shahed 136 drones have been supplied to Moscow, and which have been bombarding Ukrainian civilians. And do you know what has happened with the Iranian drones in question, which have now been dissected, the ones that have been recovered by the Ukrainians, and Western intelligence can now report they contain parts therein from Texas Instruments, which is one of the world's leading chip maker, not to mention Panasonic, Sony, Fujitsu, and other companies.
Mr. Valdmar, can I come in here, please? I take the point that you're making.
The US, UK on this, we are all in it together, and it's not a question of just isolating and blaming one person per se as such. But the reason I brought up the drones was not as a distraction, but to show you how everyone, despite being on the same page, is involved and sincerely committed to Ukraine, but these things do happen.
So, which is why I want to ask you this question. You know, it's interesting you draw this comparison between the United Kingdom and Iran. The UK is not Iran. While we concede, and we mentioned this in our report, that buying Russian oil till the 5th of December is not illegal. However, what about the high moral ground that the West has so far taken on the Ukraine war while accusing countries like India of continuing to do business with Russia while they carry on importing Russian oil using these loopholes, passing off these imports as imports from elsewhere? Now, doesn't that smack of hypocrisy? That is my limited question.
I take your point and the question and Indian indignation are on board, to which I will answer this. London and Washington understand where India stands. They have dialed down the criticism of Russian oil purchases, discounted purchases by New Delhi. I have not seen loud, vociferous calls for India to dial down. They have turned a Nelson's eye to it in recent times. And can I back this up once again by pointing this out to you? This is another very important example. I was asked the other day in a meeting, and I've pointed this out. Turkey is a NATO ally which purchased S-400 SAM surface-to-air missiles from Moscow. Turkey is under CATSA sanctions, PL-115 from Congress and Washington on it, which is a NATO ally. And guess what? India has these very same missiles, but India was waived a sanction. So the West does understand where India is coming from. And senators and congressmen on the Hill a few months ago were at pains to point out to others who were saying, why are we having double standards and shielding India? It's to show, as they did, that India is in the middle of a border conflict with China. It cannot completely wean itself off from then Soviet, now Russian weaponry, and we simply have to factor that in and India's needs. So the West is not completely committed to rank hypocrisy and bombarding India with criticism as can be made out somewhere in the Indian print media or in the news media. I've shown you a very vivid example here that Turkey, a NATO ally, has been slapped and India barely got off with a rap on the knuckles. So even on the oil question, and I do believe Dr. Jaishankar some time ago made a statement universally that would that oil supplies were to be restored from Tehran and Caracas, Iran and Venezuela, if they were to come on board the international market again, New Delhi would discontinue purchases from Moscow. But of course, given how things are panning out, I do not see that happening anytime in the near or medium future.
All right. I was only referring to the high moral ground that the West has taken on this issue. For all its talk about sanctioning and isolating Russia, is the West really walking the talk, or does its conduct smack of double standards and hypocrisy? I think that's a question that will continue to be asked, but we'll have to leave it at that. Mr. Wagmar, thank you so much for speaking to WION.